The Valley Current.
Hey, Steve, sorry for the delay. I really have a computer nightmare here that finally has been fixed, I think. I'm kind of convinced maybe the future is subscription computers that get changed every 2 years, kind of the way cell phones work. But they've got to actually allow for all the data to kind of make their way over, right? It's got to be really a simple process to move from one to the other. Probably every 2 years, even though the depreciation is typically 5 years these days on computers?
I think that computers have additional risks. I keep a hammer next to my desk to hit the thing when it fails to comply, and sometimes I hit it too hard.
Right. No, there's a funny video that made its way years ago, right before the Y2K issue became a hot issue, where the guy was like throwing his keyboard and his entire computer out the window. Like he was so fed up with an old IBM PC. He was really pissed off about it. Apparently, this cyber fraud stuff does reach individuals and not just big companies. And then an entire individual set of accounts can get wiped out and the person may be pushed into bankruptcy. That's the email that I read with the title, A Very Sad Story. We're not going to identify the person, but this is a real story, right?
It is.
Yeah, I mean, it's like hard to believe that an individual will get targeted, but I guess we're all targets now, right?
I tell all my clients that the IT security is very important, and some of them listen. And in his case, he actually called me recently, and he said that he heard me, but he thought I was exaggerating, that it couldn't really be that bad. At this point now, he's very apologetic and saying, now I understand that what you were talking about is necessary. You're just doing what needs to be done.
Right. I mean, there are people that say it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. Like, you're going to die, it's just a question of when. You're going to get hacked, it's just a question of when. You're going to have some loss from the hacking, it's just a question of when. It's not a question of if anymore. And I have to tell you, I get calls all the time, including from people that are in their 80s, who say, well, my grandson is trying to convince me to move from my regular stockbroker over to kind of an automated stockbroker. But I just like, calling my stockbroker on the phone. And yeah, I pay more money. And I'm a little worried that maybe if I move, I'm more likely to get hacked because, the person's got to identify me by voice. And it's better that I know who my broker is. And I said, you're right. You probably should just stick with your existing broker and pay the additional price because it's kind of an advantage over having an electronic account that might get hacked because he does all of his trading and his investing using a traditional broker who actually gets a phone call and says, change cash to gold or whatever he's buying and selling. And the broker's got to identify him on the phone. And that's kind of a verification step just by voice that really doesn't get handled the same way in a system that's totally digital, where there can be a lot of fraud, right? So that's something you would think full service brokers would sell, that there's some additional security. But I said to him, you're in your 80s. You should just let the friggin' broker handle the account. And there's no input from you, and they're doing everything very conservatively. And they're responsible for the hacking because you're basically not touching a keyboard. You're not even picking up a phone. It's up to them, right? They can't blame you for something that they're totally 100% in control of, right? I mean, you could view a managed account
absolutely
as essentially it's the fiduciary responsibility of the person that's managing the account.
Absolutely. There's a lot to be said for continuity of services with service providers for many reasons, and this is one of them. And having relationships is very important for the IT security. The other thing I think is that people have been slightly oversensitized to false alarms. in the IT security space. One of which is hackers actually pretend to be security providers.
Right.
And they'll say, well, your system is hacked and I need to check it. Give me your password.
Right. Right.
That's something to be very careful about. And the second thing is that it's on the IT checklists everywhere. That point one, check to see if there's an antivirus. Point two,
Right.
check to see if the antivirus is positive. And now, in my case, I have so much security in my systems that that's a false flag. That never happens. I in 20 years of doing this, I've never had a virus or hacker compromise my systems. So every time the IT support people want to check for antiviruses, I tell them there are none. And if they insist on spending a lot of time on that, I will hang up on them.
You become suspicious. Like, to me, the suspicious things that happen almost every day is some client will call, potential client will call, and will say, I got a really important case. It's worth a huge amount of money, blah, 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 the whole story. And then they say, I'm just going to send you a bunch of files and you really need to look at them before we talk. And they're not a client yet. There is no fiduciary duty. There is no real attorney-client relationship. And they sent me like 10 files that they want me to open. And I don't know who they are. I don't know where they're calling from. They could have a phone number that's local, and that obviously can be a fake number. That can be a number that's just been set up temporarily. They maybe have a website, but who knows if it's a real website? Who knows where they're really calling from? And they want you to desperately open the file. And, the minute you say, I'm not touching a file, I'm not opening it until you wire a minimum retainer, and then you pick whatever number you want to pick, depending on what screen you want to use, and you have to wire that money into a trust account. Are you ready to do that? And they say no. That's a flag. To me, that's a flag. Like, you're not serious. You really just want me to open a file desperately. And I don't really want to touch something that's radioactive, not only because it may be radioactive, but because you are tainting me with information that may prevent me from representing other clients, right? Other people might call and say, I got this dispute, and they might be on the other side of this dispute. I mean, it's possible, it happens, but every time you take a case, you essentially limit, at least for a lawyer, you potentially limit, based on conflicts of interest principles, who you can work for. And so you get constrained by every client. And individuals don't realize that. They're like, no, you can do anything you want. No, you can't do anything you want. And even just doing the interview represents a potential for you to be screened out of other matters. And they don't understand that. They don't get that. They think somehow, and that's why we ask, typically, like, tell us generally what your issue area is and what you're trying just generally to accomplish. Because if it's going to touch on something that I'm already working on, I could also be on the other side of the issue. I could be handling a case on appeal that goes directly against them. And I can't be on both sides of an issue at the same time, and maybe not for a long time, even if maybe there's an argument each way and distinctions can be drawn. And I have to tell you, most people get totally confused by this. They're like, no, you should be open for business. My money is as green as the next guy's, and so on. So even getting that little screen answered, for a lot of people, it's like, no, I don't want to answer. And you're like, forget it. I can't even take the initial call because you're not giving me enough information to judge whether or not the preclusive effect of what you're doing is going to bar me, and I don't even know who you are. So, if you're not referred by someone, I mean, Google will generate potential opportunities around the world, but if you're not really referred by someone, you're an unknown potential with unknown consequences. And people just don't understand that. They think somehow you're open for business and their money is as good as others. Of course, they don't want to part with it. And then, of course, they tell you, I had some problems with my previous lawyer. That's always a red flag, right? I had some problems with my previous lawyer. I don't think he did a good job. So you have to, expect.
Absolutely. I get those too. And I also get at probably 1 to 2 a day fake clients,
Right.
and it has become pretty obvious that there's no personal information in their initial email. There's no
Yeah.
phone number.
Right.
There's just recommended to me, and they might even pretend that they've sent me previous files or that I've done some work for them in the past, which I have not.
Right.
And just going through this sequence that leads up to providing me a file on somebody else's portal that I haven't verified or vetted, and that may
Right.
be a fake.
Right. And you could get whacked. You could be completely innocent, and you could have your life completely change based on the actions of others. And that's kind of the story that you're telling about this person that had all of his accounts taken over, which of course you call the FBI and they're like, get on the list, right?
Having tens or hundreds of clients, or even dare we say thousands of clients, is going to significantly increase your risk just because of the large number of people you deal with, especially if you're willing to touch digital information on other people's systems that have not necessarily been fully vetted by your security systems. So,
right.
And even for high net worth clients and their agents, their brokers will often give me a portal on the brokerage to access client files. And I've come to tell them now that if they want me to look at a file, if you multiply a couple of hundred clients by a handful of brokers, and now you're talking about potentially 1,000 different systems,
right?
Any of which could be compromised. And I'm not willing to face those odds. So I make one client portal, my client portal, available to the client and all their agents, and they have to do the work and the copy.
And is that like a Microsoft portal, or what are you using? What's the platform that you're using in general?
The current system I'm using is a system called Mango from Imagine Time.
And okay. Mango is like MANGO?
Like the fruit.
Okay.
And it has evolved from a top 10 CPA firm that used it as its internal system. And then a bunch of their IT folks decided to make it into a standalone product, which has been working reasonably well. And it has enough certifications. And so far, so good. On my website, we've got a statement of IT controls and IT policies that will tell concerned people more about the IT security in place. Especially when you start dealing with publicly traded companies, then they have to be compliant with Sarbanes-Oxley and other concerns like SOC1 and SSAE 16 and SSAE 21. These constraints make it very important for a CPA firm to really focus on the IT security and invest in the quality of that security.
It's like more and more your budget is going for security, right? Think about it.
It requires some patience by the clients. So now everything isn't just effortless. They have to put some time into complying with my security and into their security as well.
Right.
Just to prevent things like this from happening.
Do you think folks like H&R Block and the other mass providers do anything like this? Because that's another differentiation if you're thinking about it, right? The people that do mass produced tax returns, do you think they're doing anything like this themselves?
Yes and no. So H&R Block has more of a walk-in tax processing process. And so there's less information going back and forth on the internet, which is both good and bad. If you like to drive somewhere, and if you can fit your tax return into an hour, which most of my clients cannot, then H&R Block might be sufficient. Certainly, they haven't had major hacking in the news recently that I've seen. So that means they must pay some attention to IT security.
Right. Makes sense. I mean, look, they're doing like millions of returns, right? There's like, 200 million returns that are filed every year. We've got like 200 million real taxpayers out of the 330 million Americans that exist, rough numbers, roughly something like that. Am I right? Or am I'm not including the corporate returns, the individual returns?
Yes, there are. And there's also a temporary seasonal tax staff working inside the company with access to people's files and information. And
Right. That's dangerous. That's dangerous, right?
Necessarily highly paid or highly bonded.
Right.
That's a concern.
Right. That's dangerous. I mean, that's a dangerous aspect, right?
Our new president, Trump, has ordered that we will do away with checks in the tax processing effective September of this year.
So how does that work? Everyone will wire the money in or will do some link, or how's that going to work? Because most people historically have used checks, right?
Most people have used checks, and I see some challenges in the transition. And I don't think that a September target date is feasible. I see some good points to pushing this change, but I also see a lot of concerns. One of which is that if you greatly increase the amount of actual money that's moving electronic, that opens up risks.
Right, right. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the government wants to move more digitally, right? They're going to back some type of digital currency. I don't know what they're calling it, but it's in the news. It's some sort of stable coin that's not going to vary as much as we see Bitcoin and Ethereum and the other cryptocurrencies out there vary. I don't know whether it's actually going to get adopted, because I can tell you a lot of people think, hey, if I have to have a digital cryptocurrency account, I don't feel like I'm comfortable anymore with passwords and the rest, because the government doesn't seem to get to the bottom of most of the cyber piracy that occurs. They don't really get to, I mean, they're laying off something like 12,000 CIA agents, I read in the paper this morning. I think they should redeploy them into like a whole new group that just approaches cyber piracy as a major initiative instead of DOGE, or with DOGE, I guess, Department of Government Efficiency. There should be like a Department of Cybersecurity, right? That just focuses on dealing with like your friend's problem. They would call up the DOCS, Department of Cybersecurity, and he would say, look, I got hacked and I lost all this money. Because isn't the weird thing of this is the guy loses all of his money. Does he actually get a tax deduction for that loss? Does he actually get any tax benefit from that loss, or is he totally hosed on the loss?
And that's a wonderful question, because that's what I help people with. That's the kind of questions that are the bread and butter for my firm. It may be a loss. The best scenario is if it was a business account used for business purposes, and then it's deductible by the business.
It's almost like saying it's an additional benefit to have your family wealth inside of an LLC that you're running as a real business, because fundamentally, if you have that kind of cybersecurity attack, Uncle Sam, to some degree, is going to subsidize the loss at whatever rate your tax rate would be going into the future. Like if you regain things, you'll have, and you're at 40% or 37% or whatever the max number is, you'll have that offset, right? Conceptually.
And again, for it to be a real business, it has to be an operating business, not just an investment activity, because investment activities are almost always considered personal.
Right.
You have some recourse through attorneys and police and criminal recovery.
But those cases are really hard to win, because these companies or groups that are doing it, they disappear. And they're usually behind a bunch of shell companies and companies that have no real person behind them, just another shell behind another shell behind another shell. Unless you have the long arm of the FBI or the CIA or some real government agency that can reach and trace, it's a big, expensive process. And it's not easy to win, or even if you win, it's not easy to recover. So the reality is it's typically offshore. It's typically in a jurisdiction where there's going to be all sorts of asset protection trusts that these pirates, fundamentally, that are running these operations, can be assured that the country is not going to allow the trust assets to get invaded, because it's viewed as kind of a valid entity under that local law that might be, for example, in a foreign country like Russia. And there's no way, even if you win, that you're going to get that judgment enforced. And a lot of lawyers will say, yeah, let's go, rah, rah, rah. And after spending a six-figure amount in legal fees, they'll say, oh, we're really sorry. It traces to some group in Russia, and there's no way we can expect to recover in Russia or Lebanon or Iran or Iraq or, a bunch of countries that were not exactly have any treaty mutuality on enforcement of judgments. There's only a subset of countries that have signed off on that treaty. And interestingly, they only really enforce judgments that mostly arise from arbitration awards, not from litigation. Like, they don't trust the court systems in the other countries. They trust the arbitration systems. It's like a weird aspect of the way these treaties get done. They get done around people that have private arbitration agreements should be able to enforce them in other countries because those countries want to do commercial business with arbitration clauses. But if it's in the judicial system, no, we can't trust that. That's a political entity. That's kind of the view. The view is that these courts are under control of their governments, and maybe there's some truth to that, right? So there's not this mutuality in the treaty system, but, most people don't understand that. They don't get that that's actually the way of play. You may get a judgment, but it's not collectible. And, a large percentage of judgments aren't collectible. So in that,
like, the answer is prevention.
It's only prevention, and maybe it's ultimately shifting the burden to a deep pocket fiduciary who basically has to care. And if they don't care, or if something breaks, they're almost strictly liable. And the recourse is their insurance, which hopefully they have. So you just lay it off. That's what I ended up saying to this 80-something-year-old, he's fairly well off. I said, at your age, you just should pay whatever the asset management fee is and let them be in control and let them manage it conservatively. And the security is in their systems. And you're not doing anything to compromise anything. And you have, whatever your secret word is with your broker to talk about a need for wire transfer, that sort of thing. And it all gets handled in a way that's really secure. And maybe that's a solution at this point, right?
I'm not sure I would bring this up with an 80-something-year-old client, but a password management is something that's worth some attention.
Right.
And the idea here is that rather than having to keep a whole bunch of passwords in a paper booklet,
right,
a camera could be watching the keyboard.
Right.
Instead, you want to have some sort of intermediary password memory system that stores all your strong passwords and only requires you to identify yourself either through biometrics or through a single master password.
Right. Right. And I think that's the right advice for sure.
The master password gets typed into the keyboard, but that doesn't help anybody who's watching the keyboard because they would need not just the master password, but also your password management system.
And they would need, usually the password management system will fire back a text that's on your phone for the dual authentication, right?
Exactly. So there's a whole bunch of approaches to this. If you Google for password manager or password management, having a password management system and not just dealing with naked passwords is a huge step up in terms of preventing breaches.
Right. Do you do the two-factor authentication on that master password as well when you log in? Like, do you literally get the fire back on your cell phone and do the authentication there as well?
Yeah, yes, you can do that. You can even have an identification device that you carry with you from a vendor like Thetis, Thetis, or there's other vendors out there that produce these things. Or still have reliability issues. They still have issues with what happens if you lose your master device or it gets coffee spilled on it.
Right, right. So you actually have a device that's plugged into a USB drive, that sort of thing on your machine?
I'm testing various devices.
Yeah.
The IRS wants tax professionals to use a multi-factor authentication and potentially to use some of these devices. We're still in the evaluation stage of that, and I'm not sure I personally see a compelling 100% solution there yet. I don't want to be an early adopter and
Right.
advance technology and run
Right.
risk of having a testing technology that's not quite ready for production.
Right.
So,
I mean, you've got background in IT beyond the CPA work, right? Didn't you work for a startup or something for like 10 years doing software stuff years ago?
yes, I have a graduate study in computer science, and I'm an inactive senior member of the IEEE, the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers.
Nice.
So yes, I have background in IT, a much deeper background than most CPAs do in terms
Right.
of technology and IT.
Right.
So, and I do a lot of the tech work for my firm myself, and
Right.
so on. So yes, I have more experience with this type of stuff than most CPAs and most
Right.
firms.
So, Steve, how do people reach you? What's the best way for people to reach you if they have these issues? Because you're a multifaceted guy that does more than just tax return work. So, tell people how they would reach you.
This isn't really my main field. This is just stuff that I've been compelled to do lately. My email is srabin@srabin.com, and my website is www.taxservice2u.com, and my cell phone is 408-887-6433.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.